Explained by the Billy Meier contacts. Mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Jack the Ripper. Contact Report 467.
But concerning Jack the Ripper, it is without doubt to say that it was a man who had fallen for a degenerated sexuality, which he fulfilled in prostitutes in order to murder them, for which he used a dagger, but also a small sword and poison. He also took organs from the dead which he cooked and ate. He was born in Canada, lived for some time in the USA and then in England. The man's name was Thomas Neal Cream, and he was a trained physician, but after several murders he came under suspicion, was arrested, charged, and sentenced to death, after which he was hanged in 1892. At the same time, however, a second man was making trouble in the same way, who prosecuted the royal house of Queen Victoria, but was never caught because he managed to evade justice and gave up his bloody activities after Thomas Neal Cream was arrested.
A copycat. That's what we call copycats.
Contact Report 524.
Now I would like to ask you, which person was it that prosecuted the Queen Victoria royal family and murdered the prostitute?
It was a grandson of the Queen, Prince Albert Victor, who murdered prostitutes because he secretly courted with them and then feared that they would publicly discredit him.
By he courted with them, do you mean that he was their suitor and had love affairs with them?
That is the meaning of my words.
Contact Report 586.
At the 524th official contact conversation on the 30th of July, 2011, we also spoke again about the same thing, but I am still interested in this matter. For example, on the internet, his country of birth is mentioned as Scotland, whereas you said he was born in Canada. Recently, however, someone telephoned me and told me that the serial killer Thomas Neal Cream was a Scottish-born man, and that he was also considered the first serial killer in modern legal history.
That regarding the birth is not correct, because he was actually born in Canada, where his mother, in a very pregnant condition, was visiting an acquaintance and was looking for a suitable place where her family could settle, because they wanted to move from Scotland to Canada. The whole thing was carried out in a secret operation, so even the neighborhood of the Cream family knew nothing about it, and they were also not supposed to know. Consequently, it was told that the mother was staying with a relative who was ill and needed nursing care. So, when the time came, the mother gave birth to Thomas Neal in Canada, after which she returned to Scotland and announced the birth of her son, and also registered the birth in Glasgow on the 27th of May, 1850, hiding the fact that the birth had taken place in Canada. No one was to know that the family wanted to emigrate to Canada. So secret arrangements continued to be made for the emigration, which also took place 4 years later. Thomas Neal Cream was then hanged as a serial killer in the United Kingdom on the 15th of November, 1892 in Newgate Prison in London. In fact, he was not the only serial killer of the time who committed his murders in England, but also in Australia and Brazil, for there was another one who was up to his murderous mischief, namely a grandson of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert Victor, who murdered prostitutes because he was secretly courting them and feared that they would discredit him publicly. But at the same time, there was a third man who spread fear and terror as a serial killer, namely a certain Frederick Bailey Deeming, who was born on the 30th of July, 1853, and hanged on the 23rd of May, 1892. He also murdered his families and did his mischief in Australia, Paris, and South America. He also murdered several prostitutes, although it was only revealed that he cruelly killed his 4 children and 2 wives. Neither was he Jack the Ripper nor Prince Albert Victor, for Thomas Neal Cream was in fact the man who was given this title.
So there was not only one serial killer at work in the same period, but there were 3.
That is correct. This is also proven by my father's notes in this regard, which I studied.
So then Svath was following and recording such events.
That is the case.
Contact Report 654.
Then I would like to come another time also on the topic Jack the Ripper, because as always, there are again and again specialists who put up new theories and assertions who Jack the Ripper was. For example, there is a certain Dr. Gareth Norris who claims that he can prove that a certain Charles Allen Lechmere d. 1920 was the killer Jack the Ripper. During various conversations, which you and I had privately and openly, see Volume 11, page 373, Plejadisch-Plejarenische Kontaktberichte, it was explained, however, that a man named Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, born 27th May, 1850, executed 15th of November, 1892, was the mass murderer Jack the Ripper, who was then captured, sentenced to death, and executed.
These assertions are known to me and are based solely on confused speculations, based on pseudo-forensic assumptions and speculative constructs. This is a construct that does not yield any empirically recognizable facts within the pseudo-scientifically, pseudo-forensically constructed presumption theory. This presumption theory construct is based on a mental or even theoretical and imaginative nature that is alienated from any reality. This means, then, that the facts in question, as presented by the various know-it-alls and specialists, do not exist, but are only thought up from various wrongly assumed and interpreted indicators or facts that are not comprehensible. The false assertion, then, that the man Charles Allen Lechmere was Jack the Ripper, who actually existed and died in 1920 and never murdered, as our investigations at the time, which were carried out by my father because this Lechmere was also suspected at the time, revealed, actually corresponds only to an imaginative latent construct, or subliminal, hidden, and concealed exploration of something unknown, or an assumption following which it is a false operationalization. And in Jack the Ripper's case, this is done by the know-it-alls and experts, creating false concretizations of theoretical hypotheses and assumptions in connection with misinterpreted observable and measurable local conditions, whereby, however, the effective external influences, such as the presence and action of persons, are completely misinterpreted by the imagination.
Wow, that's an explanation I have got to digest, but I can understand. Did you think you were in an auditorium?
You think that
I think so, because it would also be easier, namely to simply say that the know-it-alls and experts, who try to reconstruct history in a forensic theoretical way, simply take the existing circumstances, such as street, trees, houses, and the place of the victim, into account. They look at everything else all around only in a presumptuous way, like people who are at the victim's place or appear in some other way, who prove them as such with suspicions through false suspicions, and also judge their actions completely wrong and award them behaviors, etc., which do not apply to them.
You're right, it could be said so in a short way.
Contact Report 672 19th Century Conspiracy Theories Regarding Jack the Ripper. The search for the real identity of Jack the Ripper left room for speculations, for instance, that he would be a secret child of Queen Victoria. False Jack the Ripper was a man by the name of Thomas Neal Cream, a trained physician who after committing several murders was arrested, charged, sentenced to death, and hanged in 1892. During the same time period as him, a second man performed his mischief in the same manner, who originated from the royal house of Queen Victoria, but who was never caught, because he ended his murdering again. Contact Report 750.
I would better ask about Jack the Ripper one more time, because even today, this murderer still will not leave certain people alone, as a result of which they are still under the delusion after more than 140 years that they have to find the real killer, who was, however, caught and executed. Since the events of that time, it must have been 1888 or so, if I remember correctly, some 80 suspects have been linked to the crimes of Jack the Ripper, who murdered and mutilated 5 prostitutes in London, by pundits and other know-it-alls and researchers. Now, recently, clever British researchers from Liverpool and Leeds again believe that they finally know the true identity of the London serial killer, and would actually know his identity, now thanks to a DNA trace they claim to have found. A certain Dr. Jari Louhelainen, as well as a David Miller, who are said to be scientists, had examined a scarf that is said to have belonged to one of the victims murdered by Jack the Ripper in 1888. At least that is what is written in the research magazine Journal of Forensic Sciences. The 2 researchers claim this because they attribute the DNA trace to an immigrant from Poland, namely a hairdresser named Aaron Kosminski, who was living in London at the time. This person was already considered by Scotland Yard as one of the main suspects about 130 years ago. This suspicion has long been held by amateur detectives, but to this day it has never been effectively proven, either halfway or completely, that he or any of the other suspects was in fact the Ripper, so that the crimes they were accused of have never been proven and no one really guilty has ever been found. Who really committed the murders, and who Jack the Ripper really was, has been the subject of repeated investigations, fantasy, and sham investigations, and many theories since 1888. For example, in the 1940s the last suspect died, while elsewhere now the latest suspect had to be Aaron Kosminski, who is said to have been Jack the Ripper, and to have been insane of consciousness, which is why he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1890, and died there 29 years later, in 1919.
As you know, I have dealt with this case out of my own interest, have investigated the truth at that time, and have been able to find out the real facts on the spot. In doing so, I have also been confronted with the real culprit, Jack the Ripper, who called himself Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, was born on the 27th of May, 1850, and executed on the 15th of November, 1892. This man was in fact the murderer Jack the Ripper, who was also caught, sentenced to death, and then executed. I am also aware of the latest claims by 2 new scientists, Dr. Jari Louhelainen and David Miller, as I am also aware of the claim that the scarf in question was found at one of the scenes of a Ripper murder. And because I was already interested in these murders and the Ripper at the time of the events, this was also the case for the scarf. Consequently, I also went back in time for it and found out that this corpus delicti belonged neither to one of the victims nor to Jack the Ripper, but to a domestic worker in an Edgecombe noble family who had lost the scarf, as I was able to establish on the spot.
Aha! And that about Jack the Ripper, whose effective name was Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, that is absolutely and incontrovertibly certain? While I don't doubt your words, because it is only a rhetorical question.
It is answered.